I don't know if you've heard, but Apple's got some new MacBook Pros out running on something called the M1 Pro and M1 Max, and they're supposed to be quite good. In all seriousness, unless you've been living off grid for the last 2 months, there's no doubt you've heard about Apple's latest MacBook Pro machines with the all-new M1 Pro and M1 Max chips. I've been using the new 16-inch MacBook Pro with the M1 Max chip for around 2 months now, and I'd love to share my thoughts on it. This is Clembo from ZenTechLife, where we love all things to do with lifestyle tech and gadgets. Just a heads up, long video warning, as I've got a lot to say this time, but I've got timestamps and chapter markers below, so if you want to skip ahead, feel free to do so. Otherwise, if you're not in any rush, grab a drink, sit back, and let's get into it. I'm going to quickly start this off by saying that prior to this M1 MacBook, I was using the very last Intel-equipped MacBook that Apple released just a year ago in 2020. It was a 13-inch model with the fully upgraded Core i7 and 32GB of RAM. Little did I know that Apple would release their first batch of M1 equipped machines just a few months later, and well, we all know what happened after that. The Intel MacBooks, like the one I just bought, pretty much got their asses handed to them by Apple's in-house silicon, and frankly the M1 MacBook Air is incredible value for the performance it's capable of outputting. And having dropped hard-earned money on the 13-inch Intel just months before, you bet I was struggling with some serious buyer's remorse. The only two things keeping me from jumping ship was the fact that there were only 2 ports on the M1 and it was still using the old chassis design. So with these 2 excuses in mind, I resisted the temptation to upgrade, and I promised myself that I'd wait for a true MacBook Pro refresh. Which brings us to today, a year later, with Apple releasing a proper revamp of the MacBook Pro line. I've had the opportunity to use the new 16-inch MacBook Pro as my daily driver for around 2 months now, and my goodness, what an improvement it's been. I'll be the first to admit that this isn't going to be a fair comparison to my 13-inch MacBook, but it's the only thing I have to compare it with. Unlike other countries, Apple in Hong Kong doesn't offer refunds, so I can't simply buy a bunch of models and return them like other YouTubers from other countries. So what can I do? Anyway, it goes without saying that switching over to the larger model this time has given me benefits such as more screen space, better thermal performance, and of course a larger battery to fuel extended sessions away from a power source. So what do I like about the new MacBook? A lot of things actually, but let's start with the hardware, namely the revival of the ports. Lots and lots of ports! Ironic really, after Apple went all in with USB-C and Thunderbolt for the last 5 years, here they are bringing back an HDMI port, SD card slot, and even MagSafe is back for the reunion. As with the rest of the world who bought a MacBook in recent years, I've been living that hashtag dongle life, and I do not miss it one bit. HDMI is still the most common video port in the world, and I've already used it to connect to projectors and screens in various situations. As trivial as that sounds, you won't believe how many times I've walked up to a projector or display only to realize I'd left my HDMI adapter behind and had to go back for it. Trust me, you'll be thankful for the HDMI port when you find yourself needing to connect with an external screen. Likewise, SD cards are still the most popular media storage format, and the return of the SD card slot is very welcome, especially as a content creator who frequently has to transfer files from my camera to the MacBook. I'm thoroughly enjoying the minimal need for an adapter or dongle, and in fact having both the HDMI and SD card slot has relegated my favourite Thunderbolt dock into the optional accessory category. I am however a bit disappointed, and perhaps some of you will disagree here, that there's no USB-A port. Okay, before you take out your pitchfork, hear me out. Don't get me wrong, I love USB-C and I pretty much refuse to buy anything that doesn't come with USB-C as standard these days. But until it starts outnumbering USB-A ports on things like motherboards, desktop computers and laptops, I can't see USB-A going away anytime soon. Even peripherals and accessories that come with a USB-C port are often packaged with a cable that has USB-A on one end. So with that in mind, I do wish Apple had included even just one USB-A port, especially as the new chassis seems to be thick enough to house one. Speaking of the new chassis, these new MacBooks are certainly thicker and heavier than their predecessors. Gone are the tapered edges, the ultra slim body, and even the feet on the bottom of the MacBook are slightly taller than before. I'll be honest, my initial thoughts when Apple revealed the new MacBooks at their keynote event was that the new chassis is a bit underwhelming. But after using it for a while, this old school industrial business look has grown on me. If portability is top priority for you and you don't need the latest and greatest in a laptop, then I would still recommend the MacBook Air with the OG M1 chip, which remains thin and light, yet still offers great performance. But if it's power that you want, then power you will get. Apple hasn't gone thick for no reason, and the larger body ensures these new M1 Pro and Max chips get sufficient cooling so they can run at full speed uninterrupted. In fact, the thermal design of the new MacBooks, coupled with the low power draw of Apple's M1 chip, means you'll virtually never hear the fans. In contrast, the Intel MacBook fans spin up loudly almost all the time. For example, if Chrome had too many tabs open, or when I was in a Zoom call. Even when my download speeds got too high, the fans on the Intel MacBook would kick in. Don't believe me? Well, listen to this. So, I can honestly say that my user experience has been truly wonderful not hearing fans whirring away all the time with this new M1 MacBook. The rare occasion I have heard the fans was when I was running back-to-back benchmarking apps and transcoding files in Final Cut Pro. Otherwise, this new MacBook has been blissfully silent in its operation. Now, onto the changes you'll find when you open up the lid. The keyboard now sits in a matching black keywell, giving it a notably different look to its predecessors. I don't really have any thoughts on this other than it looks fine. However, the keyboard itself does feel great, and if you've used any of Apple's Magic Keyboards in the last few years, then you'll know what to expect. And if you're still using a MacBook equipped with Apple's low-profile butterfly key mechanism, first of all, hats off to you for enduring that hell for so long, and secondly, these new keyboards will feel phenomenal in comparison. Of course, you can't talk about the keyboard without immediately noticing the disappearance of the TouchBar. Apple's dream of replacing the function keys with something more dynamic and versatile was admirable, but ultimately never reached its full potential. In fact, I became increasingly frustrated with the lack of native support, eventually resorting to a third-party software called Better Touch Tool to add more functionality to the TouchBar. Even then, I always found the TouchBar to be no more than a novelty, and I can definitely understand why users have been begging for the return of the function keys. This is definitely a good decision by Apple, and as they say, it's better late than never, eh? The speakers on either side of the keyboard are also best in class when it comes to laptop audio. I'm by no means an audiophile, but even my poorly tuned ears can tell the difference between these speakers and that of other laptops. They get surprisingly loud, and it's definitely unusual to hear so much depth coming from speakers so small. Coupled with these great speakers is a brand new mini LED display, which Apple calls the best notebook display. And I'm inclined to agree, because Apple's displays have always been pretty decent, offering good contrast and brightness levels, along with decent color accuracy and a wide color gamut. But this new mini LED Liquid Retina XDR display is another level of special. Previous MacBooks inherently could not offer true black levels as they used common backlit panels. Mini LED though, with its thousands of dimming zones, can turn off parts of the screen to create exceptional black levels and excellent contrast ratio. It's most noticeable when you put the old and new MacBooks side by side, with the Intel MacBook having a noticeable washed out glow to it when displaying dark scenes. Then there's the HDR performance, which really brings out the true beauty of the mini LED display. The dynamic range and colors that the new screen produces is just mind-blowing and rivals some of the best TVs on the market right now. It's not quite OLED standard, but it comes bloody close. Another welcome addition is ProMotion, which is Apple's name for variable refresh rates between 24Hz to 120Hz. It provides silky smooth movement on screen whilst also improving battery life when a high refresh rate isn't needed. The effect is silky smooth and makes the overall user experience feel snappier and more responsive. Additionally, it's taken a while, but the bezels are finally slimmer too. However, along with the thinner bezels comes the controversial notch, which definitely triggered some strong reactions when it was revealed. Having used this MacBook daily for the last few weeks, I can genuinely say I barely notice it's there. If you have dark mode always enabled like I do, and you use a predominantly black wallpaper, the notch basically disappears. It doesn't interfere with the viewable area at all, and the new vertical screen space becomes a handy home for the menu bar. If you ask me, the controversy surrounding the notch seems like a slight overreaction, but I will agree on one thing: the disappointment from the lack of Face ID. If Apple can fit a FaceTime camera and Face ID into the tiny notch of an iPhone, why not add it to these new MacBooks? Especially considering the price they're asking. For now, you have to suffice with Touch ID, which is still better than manually entering a password, but let's hope Face ID makes an appearance in the next refresh. That's a lot of talk about physical hardware, but how about performance? So what do I do with my MacBook? Well, I'm a teacher by profession, so a typical day involves working with Microsoft Office applications, Zoom video calls, a lot of browser activity using Google Suites and other edtech platforms, and the occasional CAD project when I'm working on 3D design and 3D printing lessons. Yet despite the simplicity of these tasks, the 2021 MacBook Pro still manages to perform a lot better than my previous Intel MacBook, and it absolutely flies through tasks. Naturally, as a content creator too, video editing performance is also quite important to me. Working in Final Cut Pro used to be a bit of a chore, and now it's an absolute pleasure. Thanks to the twin ProRes accelerators that come built into the M1 Max chip, the new MacBook has never skipped a frame, never stuttered, nor shown any signs of slowing down since I've started using it. I have better quality turned on for once, and it still chews through 4K footage absolutely effortlessly. In contrast, I always had to use better performance mode on the Intel MacBook when working with 4K files, and even then, there was still frequent slowdowns and skipped frames. Playback and scrubbing the timeline is now silky smooth, not to mention transcoding RAW files into ProRes is bonkers fast. In fact, it's so fast now I'm going to miss my tea breaks, which I used to take whenever I queued up my files for transcoding or started an export on the Intel MacBook. Moving on, I love a good benchmark, and despite the synthetic nature of them, I still think they're some of the easiest ways to get an objective look at the performance of a computer. As I said before, I'm a small-time YouTuber, so I don't have multiple MacBooks to benchmark, so the results you're about to see will simply be comparing my previous Intel MacBook with this new M1 Max model. If that's of no interest to you though, then you can probably skip ahead. Looking firstly at Geekbench's CPU tests, there's a comfortable 45% increase in single core performance and a very significant 160% increase in multi-core performance. Cinebench, which tests CPU rendering performance, also showed similar gains of nearly 40% on the single core test and 150% on the multi-core test. To put that into perspective though, most years a refreshed CPU might offer between 10 to 20% performance gains, so to see these numbers is frankly incredible. But I'm not done yet, because where it really shines is in GPU performance, and prepare to be astonished because there's over 500% improvement on the Geekbench Metal and OpenCL benchmarks, and close to 10 times the performance running graphics bench tests. It's truly remarkable that Apple has managed to design an onboard GPU that finally offers performance that used to be exclusive to power-hungry GPUs. I feel like Intel has been trying to achieve this for years with its Iris graphics technology, but they always fell a bit short, which is probably another reason why Apple ditched Intel and said, we can do it better. The most impressive thing to me though is just how energy efficient these new machines are. The battery life is simply stunning. I can easily get a whole day with a fully charged battery. This is such a stark contrast from what I'm used to experiencing on the Intel MacBook, where more often than not by noon I'd be sitting at less than 50% battery. I used to dread taking Zoom calls when running on battery because it would easily drain 40 to 50% of the battery after just an hour of video conferencing. But now with the M1 MacBook, it only drops by around 10 to 15% after the same duration. I have absolutely no worries that when I pick up this machine, it will last through the day no matter how busy my day gets. Right, so I've been gushing over the new MacBook for most of this video, but it isn't without some of its shortcomings. Despite the glorious mini-LED display having ProMotion outside of macOS animations, there's currently very little that supports the 120Hz refresh rate. Even Apple's own apps like Safari still run at 60 FPS, which is a real shame. Another display related issue is that there seems to be some instability when connecting to an external display in clamshell mode. This doesn't work nearly as well as it should, and it will randomly decide to not wake the external monitor. It's quite annoying because I then have to open up the MacBook, tap a key to wake it up, then close it and put it back in its dock. It's worth noting that this seems to only happen when waking it in clamshell mode. Connecting an external display when it's already awake is never a problem. So I'm not sure if this is a hardware fault or software fault, but whatever it is, it needs to be fixed. Additionally, as much as I've praised the return of the ports, these aren't the latest and greatest available right now. The HDMI port is not the latest 2.1 variant, meaning it won't be able to output 4K at 120Hz, and the SD card reader is limited to UHS-2 speeds, which will make large file transfers take a bit longer than you might like. So despite how wonderful it is to have these ports back, considering how expensive these new MacBooks cost, it's a real shame that Apple didn't equip them with the latest tech. Another drawback, which might easily be unnoticed, is that fast charging at 140 watts is only available via MagSafe. So if you're expecting to quickly top up 50% charge in 30 minutes as advertised, be wary that you'll need to use MagSafe to achieve that. Last but not least, you'll have noticed that I haven't really mentioned gaming in this video, and for good reason. It's simply not great. Yes, there are reports of some games running decently via Parallels or crossover, but my personal experience with both of these methods has been mediocre at best. Parallels runs poorly because it's a virtual machine running an ARM edition of Windows, which itself is emulating a game built on x86 code. These layers of translation and emulation just destroys game performance, or most of the time breaks the game. Crossover is slightly better in that it's supposed to be a simple compatibility layer, but what you can play is pretty much dictated by whether the crossover team has added support and optimization to the game you want to play. So it's pretty hit and miss which games will run well and which will not. So no. Despite Apple's fancy marketing graphs showing the 32-core GPU in the M1 Max coming close to the RTX 3080, when it actually comes to gaming, the new MacBook Pros are simply not recommended. Admittedly, the very few games that run on Metal and have native M1 support do play very well. Games such as Shadow of the Tomb Raider, Divinity Original Sin 2, and the still in development Baldur's Gate 3. But the number of native M1 games is so pitifully small right now, it hardly counts as an argument to get one of these for gaming. Phew, that was a lot to say about the new 2021 MacBook Pro. But honestly, this level of redesign and improvement isn't typical and only comes once every 5 or 6 years. With so many new features and design changes, I wouldn't be doing the new MacBooks justice if I had condensed the video. To end this exceptionally long review, when I take a step back and look at the total package offered by these new MacBooks, yes, they are obscenely expensive at times, but it offers truly outstanding performance, astonishing battery life, virtually silent operation, and gives you the best display available right now on a laptop. If you're looking for a portable powerhouse for productivity and especially content creation, the 2021 MacBook Pros are the way to go. I will say, however, that the M1 Max chip is probably overkill for 90% of consumers. The M1 Pro seems to strike that sweet spot of great performance, good value, and excellent battery life. Just steer clear of that base model 14-inch M1 Pro because that comes with 2 fewer cores than it should. If you made it this far, thanks so much for watching, and I really hope you enjoyed the video. Tell me, did you pick one up yet? Are you eyeing one up now? Or is there something you really don't like about them? Let me know your thoughts about the new 2021 MacBook Pros by leaving a comment below. Also, if you liked my content, hitting that thumbs up button goes a long way for me. And if you want to catch more content from me, then also consider pressing that subscribe button too. That's all for now. Be well, stay safe, and I'll catch you in the next one.